Great. So thank you everyone for attending our webinar today. We have some folks just joining in as well, so the numbers will tick up here. But we got a lot of cool stuff to cover, so I want to get right into it. So 17.2 just released last week. I believe it was Wednesday. We did the launch. You could download your bits. Today, we are going to go over all the new things that are in 17.2. Ton of great stuff. My name's Jason Beres. I'm our Senior VP of DevTools. With me is Brian Lagunas, who's the Senior Product Owner across all of our XAML products, and George Abraham, who is our Senior Product Owner and Senior UX Architect for Indigo Studio. So you can get the idea. We're going to be showing a bunch of different things here with the folks that are online. George is connecting in from India today. He just went there yesterday. So hopefully we don't have any connection issues during his demo later on. And of course, Brian always comes to us from Boise, and I'm here on the East Coast in New Jersey. So let's get into this and start talking about what 17.2 is all about at a high level. And really what we're focused on is developer productivity. As you saw the releases earlier this year and what we talked about through our webinar earlier in the year and what you're seeing come through in the blogs is that we're really focused on delivering developer productivity across the board, across all of the toolkits in the suite. And this goes right from the designer. So when you think about the visual designer using their tools, to the UX designer using a tool like Indigo Studio, down to the developer using all of the stuff that we ship in Ultimate. So there's three areas that we're going to touch on today, and the developer productivity story will be weaved throughout the demos, and I think you'll get the idea as we go along, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's coming next. So in the modern web, we've got a bunch of new features in Ignite UI. We have a brand new CLI, which is pretty exciting and allow you to use Visual Studio Code to do command line stuff. We have a brand new release of Ignite UI for Angular, which we'll get into in a little bit. We've got some new features across the board, new controls, so lots of stuff to talk about in modern web, and we'll talk about those slides in a little bit, but that's a big part of this release today. Design team productivity is also huge, and we're going to get into this with George's demo later on. We've done a lot of work around where the designer, the visual designer, lives and how they interact with the UX designer. So one of the things we're hearing over and over again in the market is that everyone uses Sketch to design their applications, and then they go into an interaction design tool like Indigo Studio. So we've married Sketch to Indigo Studio, and that'll come through pretty quickly there with George's demo. And then, of course, we've had an on-prem version of Indigo Studio for a while, but we're really getting serious about it now. We've done some tweaks. We have a really nice installation. We have an administrative console, and we have an offer around Indigo Studio on-prem. So if you are an enterprise that does not allow cloud-based sharing of stuff like your designs, you can choose to go with the Indigo Studio on-prem version, and you can have all of the benefits of Indigo Studio or indigodesign.com on-prem without any interaction with the cloud at all. And then finally, around desktop LOB, we're still investing across the board in WPF and Windows Forms. These are big parts of the product, and a lot of you guys still use these every day while you're sort of dipping your toe into modern web. But we've got new features in grids across the data charts. We have new themes in WPF, all of the new data visualizations in Windows Forms, and then Brian's going to walk through some of the new productivity tooling in visual configurators. So let's go into some of the more details on the new features here for WPF. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, we added a new theme. Earlier this year, we shipped Royal Dark, or actually we started to ship it last year, and we added some more features this year in the Royal Dark theme, which ends up being a really popular theme for WPF. Well, we flipped that over to Royal Light now, so now you have a really nice theme with a white background versus a dark background, with purple being the primary color that's used throughout all of the selectors and text box outlines and whatever you're clicking on. So Royal Light ends up being something that looks pretty darn good. One of the features we've also did across data visualization was ship the new scatter chart, the new shape chart. These charts actually allow you to render various types of shapes, polygons, etc., and then combine those into different views. I'm going to show some demos of that in a little bit. It'll give you a little clearer idea. But out of that came a couple interesting things. First off is the break-even chart. So the break-even chart was something that you could accomplish before with doing different polygons and polylines on the data chart, but now we've actually just created a chart type where you pass a few data points to the break-even chart, and then you have a really nice financial chart which shows you the points of break-even and profitability for your business. So break-even charts really kind of get to a single visualization which talks about your revenue, your total cost, your fixed costs, your variable costs, and then all of that stuff. When do I start seeing profit? When do I start seeing revenue in a single visualization? So this is a very popular chart in accounting and cost accounting, and you can literally throw 3 or 4 pieces of data at it now and we render the whole thing out. Another big feature is our time axis on the chart. So you've always been able to render time series data on the chart, no problem, but we always looked at it as the numeric piece of data or a numeric type. What we've done is we've done a little bit of work to make it easier on you. So now this really does, the chart does see it as a time type, and it gives you all kinds of neat capabilities, like I want to include or exclude weekends, I want to block out certain holidays, and you just throw out the date and we automatically understand it. This also gives you a really nice way of doing a financial chart with less code. So you could always do financial charts, but now we make it super easy. And then in 18.1, we're actually going to make it even easier with the introduction of just a full-on stock chart. I'll show you a little bit of how this works today and what you might expect in 18.1 as we add a little bit more capability to it. And then across the board, some new series: scatter, scatter area, scatter contour, scatter polygon, scatter polygon. And really what this just allows you to do is continue to push the chart to probably limits that you wouldn't have thought of. So I want to take something like shape data, an Esri shape file, and bind it to the chart. Or I want to give the chart certain coordinates on an X and Y axis value and show a floor plan. And then within that floor plan have areas that are clickable, which represent things on that plan. So it gets really interesting what you can do once you start looking at how you can render basically now any type of shape with this chart. And then Brian is going to get into some of the visual configurators in his demo as well. And now looking at Windows Forms, same thing, a lot of work in the data visualization side, a little bit of work on the grid. One of the nice things we do with Windows Forms is that we shipped the category chart over the last 12, or the actual data chart from WPF to Windows Forms over the last 12 months. In this release, we've pushed out the category chart API. So the category chart is a much simpler API on top of the data chart, which essentially you just throw your data at the chart, no other settings, and we will figure out the best guess chart to render with that. Of course, you can customize it as much as you want with different label values, different label configuration, different titles, etc. But the real idea is that you don't want to have to write a lot of code just to get a basic chart. We do the work for you. And then you can see here we've done a lot of work around the gauges, Sparklines, all the barcodes are moved over, and then we've added editors in column headers for the Ultra Grid, which is pretty nice because if you're giving someone a grid and it's interactive at runtime and they want to change a field, like for example, they're rendering data from a database and you're giving them the ability to change the name of that column header, you can do that with editors in the column header. So big release for Windows Forms, and we're not slowing down. You'll continue to see investment in both WPF and Windows Forms as we move forward into 18.1 and 18.2. So we're really going heavy in JavaScript right now, but we're not forgetting about these two important platforms. And of course, if you have feature requests, please email ideas@infragistics.com, because at this point, we're really looking for customers to tell us what's important to them in the rich client platforms. So moving right along into modern web. Modern web became very interesting with for us with the release of 17.2. So earlier in the year, we renamed Ignite UI to Ignite UI for JavaScript, and then we had an open source product that was just under development now for about a year called JS Blocks. Well, with 17.2, we're officially renaming JS blocks to Ignite UI for Angular. So we actually have two paths for JavaScript-based modern web developers, and it really depends on what you're doing. And it's real easy, though, to kind of figure it out. If you're an Angular dev and you're building on Angular and you don't want any dependencies on other frameworks besides Angular, then you're going to use Ignite UI for Angular. If you're doing JavaScript development and you want to do React, or you're doing jQuery, or you're doing MVC, you're going to use Ignite UI for JavaScript. So when you think about Ignite UI for Angular, Angular ends up being this different beast of a framework. It's very prescriptive in its guidance. And so the best outcome for you as a modern web developer is to use a UI toolkit that's built on that framework, not to use extensions or other things, because then you can't take advantage of things like the rendering pipeline, how templating works, etc. So that's why we went ahead and decided to build Ignite UI for Angular. Now on the flip side, something like React really works well. We have extensions in Ignite UI for JavaScript with React. We have MVC assemblies for all of the UI widgets in Ignite UI for JavaScript. So if you're using Visual Studio, you get the benefits of MVC and Razor pages using Ignite UI for JavaScript, etc. And then if you're using Angular 1.5x, we have extensions in Ignite UI for JavaScript for those frameworks. So we're going to keep investing in both of these frameworks. One of the things that we are actually doing now in Ignite UI for JavaScript is we are removing its dependency on jQuery. So jQuery was a library. So it's still probably one of the most widely used libraries in the world on websites. In fact, we just did an Angular conference, and the Angular website by Google used jQuery actually in their website, which we thought was pretty interesting. But at the end of the day, we are continuing to look at this idea of dependency free. So in Ignite UI for JavaScript, over the next 12 months, you can expect us to remove any dependency from that, so you don't have to actually use even the tiny jQuery library, exactly like we've done with Ignite UI for Angular. It is a dependency free framework. The nice thing is Ignite UI for Angular built in TypeScript, it's material based, which means that it flows right into what Google is pushing with material design. It's not like we're putting a theme on top of it to make it look like something that is material based. So anyway, I think you get the idea. If you're an Angular dev and you want dependency free, go for option number 2, Ignite UI for Angular. All other JavaScript developers continue to use option number 1. Now from a licensing perspective, it's $695 for Ignite UI for Angular, and it's $899 for Ignite UI for Angular plus Ignite UI for JavaScript. So you can get both toolkits for $899, which means, you know, for less than $1,000, which is like a no-brainer, you can cover any type of modern web development that you're actually doing. So let's take a look at what we did new in Ignite UI for JavaScript in 17.2. Again, we're continuing to invest in here. This is a super robust framework. It's been in the market now going on 6 years. So when you think about what we've done with this, you'll see it in the demo. Now we have an Excel spreadsheet that's full read-write that has all the capabilities of our Excel library, all rendering in JavaScript. So big features, big capabilities in this product because it is very mature. So all of the stuff that we talked about in WPF with the shape chart comes across, so you get the ability to render things like the break-even chart with intersecting polygons, because that's all part of that shape chart assembly. We shipped a scheduling component earlier this year. We're continuing to invest there, so we've got recurring events, day view, week view now shipping. The spreadsheet, we have full editing support now. In the grid, we've done some work there on cell merging. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we have a whole command line interface to build out what you can do just from a command window in Visual Studio Code, or just from PowerShell or whatever. So that's actually a pretty cool thing. It's also customizable and extensible. So I'm going to show you a couple things today. We're continuing to add templates and capabilities, but you can go ahead and add your own templates and capabilities yourself. This is all up on the web. It's all open source. It's all on GitHub, so you can have at it and do what you like. So now introducing Ignite UI for Angular. Again, brand new product, material-based, 100% built on top of Angular. It is a dual license, so this is a commercial product, but if you are using it for education, in education, or in open source projects, you can use the non-commercial open source license, but this is a commercial product. Even though everything's available on GitHub, you can go up to the Ignite UI GitHub page, and we have some pins up there, and you can go right to the Angular widgets for JS blocks and open up the repo, clone it, and just start having fun with it. So this right now is 25 plus, actually it's around 30 responsive material UI widgets. We're shipping a grid. Today the grid has sorting, filtering, paging, movable columns, column templates. I'll give a quick demo of this, but we're continuing to add things like multi-column headers, collapsible column groups, inline. Actually, you can do inline editing today, but it's sort of V1 of this grid, and now we're sort of in this feature race to give you more and more features that you need to deliver, robust line of business apps in Angular. Data visualizations. It's a little early. We are in the process of getting our business chart, so essentially the category chart, up in release. So that'll probably happen in the next month or so, but you'll have things like line charts, area charts, bar charts, etc. up there, and that'll be part of the license as well, and we'll just continue to add value. And then one of the neat things here is, similar to what we're doing in Indigo Studio, we are bridging the visual designer to the product developer with our Sketch UI kit. So we have a Sketch UI kit for Angular, Ignite UI for Angular, which means that if your designers are using Sketch, they have the pixel perfect representation of every widget that we ship with the product in Sketch, so they can design any experience and then map that to what we ship in the product. Now, what Sketch gives you right now is the ability to grab CSS, layout, etc. Stay tuned for some neat things that we're doing to further continue that conversation between Sketch, Indigo Studio, and then ultimately outputting to usable code, which of course, as you know today, if you've used Indigo Studio, we do ship a code exporter with that. The code exporter today just imports the Ignite UI for JavaScript product. Fast forward, within the next release or two, you'll start seeing some of that Angular stuff come through. So with that, what I'm going to do is start getting into some demos. Now, the first demos that I want to talk about are on the productivity tooling side. So I'm going to pass my my screen sharing capability over to Brian, and Brian is going to be the presenter now, and he's going to demo off some of the new configurators that we've been working on in XAML. And what we're going to do with these is continue to move these over to HTML. So what Brian demos now, you'll start seeing in the next couple releases in our JavaScript products as well. So Brian, take it away.
All right, can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm here to talk to you about is productivity. And so before we get to productivity, we got to talk about how we get there, right? We got to solve these problems that developers have every day to make them more productive in their daily jobs. And so if you've been using Infragistics controls, you realize our controls are super powerful, they're super fast, and they have a ton of features that you'll probably never learn in your lifetime. I've been in Infragistics for over 5 years, and I still don't know the APIs of all our controls because they're just that vast. So, for example, I'm a WPF developer, always have been, hardcore. I don't use designers. I'm all about hand typing my XAML. So when I start using our controls, I'll start out like, yeah, I'm going to use our XAM radial gauge. You know, I'll start typing some properties in by hand, right? I'll stick it in the first row, yada, yada, yada. And then we get a nice basic little radial gauge. Now, the problem is that these controls have so many features, and they're so extensible that it's just impossible for me to sit here and hand type everything I need to do in order to make this radial gauge look exactly what I want. So like, for example, I'm going to uncomment this code here. Let's say I wanted my radial gauge to look like that, right? I mean, that's a good looking radial gauge. It's going to meet my business needs. But can you imagine sitting here typing all of this code by hand? You click on the design surface, and as you know, the design surface in WPF has a lot to be desired. There's not a lot of interaction you can do there. So you are really limited to hand typing on the XAML out. But you would have to be some type of master of APIs and like XAML wizard beyond anything I've ever seen to be able to set these properties and know what each property means, what each of these decimal values and changing it from a 5.5 to a 5.6, and what impact that has on the control itself. Now, I don't know anyone in the right mind that would want to sit here and write this code by hand, unless you get paid by the hour. Then you're probably, yeah, you'd love to do this, right? But I don't get paid by the hour. So wouldn't it be nice if I can make this to where you don't have to write any of this by hand, right? So I want to take the gap, right? We're here. I want to get from here to here without having to write a single line of this code. That's my goal. And so what we came up with is what's called a control configurator. And the way we launch this is we're going to select the control name, and then you're going to see the quick action light bulb show up. Now, I like to use the shortcut of control dot to launch the control configurator. Now, what I have is a visual editor. It allows me to come into this and visually see every change I make to this control will happen before my eyes. For example, you know what? I want 3 ranges. Okay, there's my 3 ranges. I want my shape to look weird like this big fat one, right? I want my brushes to be this color. I can change my scales, what the scales look like. And then I can really start digging into the various properties of this control and see exactly what it does. Like, for example, all those needle properties we saw, like, oh, what's this needle start extent do? Well, I can sit here and start playing with this value, dragging it around, and I can actually learn what these properties do because I can see them real time as I make these modifications. So this is going to be a great learning tool as well. Now, what's really cool is we also have these things considered called a quick start, right? It's a quick set template. These are some pre-built templates, if you will, that you can use to quickly apply to get the gauge as close as possible to what you're looking for. Like, so for example, oh, this is really close to what I'm looking for. So I'm just gonna go ahead and select that, and it's gonna go ahead and set all the properties necessary in order to make that gauge or control look like that. And then a lot of these controls have what we call design time data. So I can come in here, this particular control only has a value property, but I can come in here and play with design time data to see what the grid would look like if I actually provided it some values. Imagine a data grid, right? We can actually have rows generated for you with various data types. So you actually see what the data is going to look like when it's rendered on screen. Over here, there's always some pane that allows you to control certain aspects of the control. So in this case, ranges. So I can sit here and change these ranges. Like I can come to the last range and I can say, oh, what's this inner end extent do? Oh, okay. So you can sit here and play with this and like, oh, that's pretty cool. I like that instead. And you can really learn and dial in these controls. And the best part about this is, let's go back here. Okay, let's say we designed it exactly how we want, right? But we also have data that we need to apply to this. Now, when you're inside of Visual Studio, you have this little cool data binding creator, or you can hand type it, whatever, right? Well, we had the same experience here. So I want to data bind this value to a property in my view model because I'm doing MVVM, right? So I'm going to click this little button here, this little square to the right, and say create data binding. Now, this brings up a data binding editor, and what this does is it's going to basically take the best guess at what your view model is. And we use a convention that basically says the view model is going to be your page name plus view model. So this page is called radial gauge, and then we're going to say plus view model, and then it's going to go find that class, and it's going to list all the properties in that class that you can bind to. So I can bind to this value property. If by chance we get it wrong, or you're using a different convention, you can change. You can come in here and search all the assemblies in your project for the correct class, right? But we got it right, so we're just going to stick with this. You can change your modes, provide converters, formats, you name it, right? So we're going to go ahead and create the binding there. You'll see the yellow outline. Now I'm just going to hit apply and close. I'm going to format my my document so you can see. And I think Visual Studio actually changed their key combination. Oh, there we go. Yep, they did. But as you can see, that went ahead and generated all that nasty code that you would have to sit there for no telling how long trying to write it. And I honestly don't know how you would do it. Now, this control configurator is available for a number of controls. So to show you how powerful this is, let's just kind of open up our Solution Explorer. And I have a bullet graph, category chart, a line gauge, and a pie chart that we're going to configure in just a minute or two. So I'm going to launch my configurator. We'll pick a quick set. Yeah, I want it to look like this. I have a value here that I'm going to create a data binding for. There's my value. We have a target value. We'll create a, there we go, target binding for that. We'll set our max at, I don't know, how about 500. That works for me. Apply and close. Boom, done. Next control. Okay, category chart. I have this category chart that I need to configure real quick. I already have my data source, and in this case, the control knows what's required, and you're not allowed to do anything because you have to have an item source first. So I can pick any of these collections that are in my view model. For example, custom data model. That sounds good. We'll create that. We generate some data. We have sample data over here to where we can start playing with various values. I can change my chart types here. You know what? This spline looks pretty good, right? You can change brushes, whatever. So boom, done there. There's our chart. Next, linear gauge. We'll come to our linear gauge, control dot, configure this one. This has some built-in ones. This one looks pretty cool. Let's do our max at 100. I want to data bind my value to something in my view model. Apply and close. Boom, done. Next, pie chart. Here's another control that actually requires a data source to function. So once again, you're going to be prompted, hey, you need an item source. No problem. I'll give you one. I'll use this cool data binding picker. I need a label path. We'll choose it. I don't know. We can change the layout to something like this. Yeah, it looks fine. Boom, done. Right. So I just went ahead and let's go ahead and just run the app. But in under a minute, I configured all 5 of those controls. Actually, it's taking longer for the Visual Studio to build and run the application than it did to actually configure all those controls how I needed them. And here we go. So there's our bullet graph. Here's our category chart, our linear gauge, our pie chart, and our radial gauge. So this is what you see is what you get. Okay. Now, while we do have this in WPF, we also have some great tools in Xamarin Forms. Now, I don't know how many Xamarin Forms devs we have on here, but the first thing I want to show you is what's actually free. You don't have to pay for this. It's called the Infragistics App Map. Now, the Infragistics App Map is for creating Xamarin Forms .NET standard projects. So if you go download this right now from the Visual Studio Marketplace, it's called the Infragistics App Map. It's completely free. All it does is require you to have a Infragistics username and password. That's it, right? So we'll go ahead and create an app map project. We'll get to pick the platforms we care about. We're going to pick our DI container. We do this because we use Prism to generate these Xamarin Forms applications. We're going to make sure we show the app map, and we're going to create our project. Now we're going to be prompted with a cool little dialog, which gives you a Visio style type interface. And I can start dragging over, yeah, I want a master detail page, right? And we'll say, I'm gonna call this one the data grid page, right? And I can come name these, and I can create relationships and how these different pages navigate to each other and generate my entire application in minutes. Now, if you're using Visual Studio 2015 or you're using 2017 and you're not using the new .NET standard templates, creating a Xamarin Forms application takes forever, okay? Now I want you to notice how quickly it's going to take to create this Android project. And this is with like 6 instances of Visual Studio running on my box right now. Boom, we're done already. Now this is the .NET Standard project. So what's gonna happen is when you create a .NET Standard project, it's gonna go automatically restore all your NuGet packages. And I'll prove this is .NET Standard because I'm going to right click and edit this project file. And there you go. That's the project file for our .NET Standard project. Now, like I said, that's free. If I wanted to, I could even do it to an existing project. I can say, hey, add new item. I'll go to the Infragistics, the app map. We're going to get a dialog. Let's add a content page this time. We'll just leave it called page name. We'll generate it, and we'll see that the page that we just created is added to the project, and then it's automatically registered for navigation. So if you're using a Prism app, you have to register your pages for navigation, but it's done automatically. It creates the view and the view model. I mean, you're done. Now, we don't stop there, right? So another thing that we added is an Infragistics toolbox. So for example, I'm gonna delete all this in here, and we have a Xamarin Forms toolbox that allows you to just basically drag and drop any element over like you would in WPF. The cool thing about this is that it's powered by NuGet. So I'm gonna manage the NuGet packages for this solution. I'm gonna browse my Infragistics feed, and I'm gonna add an XF control. We'll call, how about the data grid? That'll work for me. Let's go ahead and install these NuGet packages. Yep, that works. Should just take a second, and we should be done. Okay, restoring, done, perfect. So now that that's there, we're gonna go ahead and open up this toolbox again, and you'll see the XAM data grid. That is powered by NuGet. So I can drag that over, and boom. Not only did it bring the control over, but it also brought over the namespace automatically, right? So if you've done Xamarin Forms development, you should be blown away right now, because there is absolutely zero productivity in Xamarin Forms development. There's no toolbox, there's no designer. So how do we manipulate this grid, right? Well, we'll need to start off by having some actual data. So I'm gonna add a new folder. I'll just call this data. And I have some files already set aside that we can use. And it's gonna be here. And I'm just gonna bring all these in, because we need a view model. We need some data to bind to this. We're bringing this toolbox. Where's my little, there they are. So I'll bring that over. And then we'll bring this over. Not there, but here. Add my usings. Okay, boom, done. So last thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll build the project. And now what I want to do is I want to configure this data grid, right? So as soon as my build is done, it said it succeeded. There, it really succeeded that time. We have the control configurators in Xamarin Forms as well. So now I can launch this data grid, and I can visually configure this control to meet my needs. So create data binding. Yes, we have a data binding dialog for Xamarin Forms as well. I'm going to create that collection and look at all this data that it generated for me automatically. But I don't want to auto-generate columns. I want to add my first name, my last name. That'll work. And I want to actually group on my last name. So I'll add a grouping. We'll sort that grouping by ascending, and there's my grouping. And you'll notice that as I scroll, the header of the group is sticky until I scroll the next one into view, and it just kind of pushes out of the way. If you don't like that, you can turn off is group row sticky, and then they just scroll like normal. Okay, I'll hit apply and close, and my grid has been created for me. F5, I'm running in the emulator, debugging in no time. So wow. As you can see, we're not just focused on controls. A lot of control vendors are just focused on controls, features. But we really want to make you productive in your everyday work when you use the controls. We don't want you to buy our product, drag the control onto the screen and go, ugh, now what? Do I get paid by the hour? Crap, I don't. Okay, this is a big waste of time, right? We don't want that. We want you to be productive. And so you can expect a lot more tools like this coming out. We're constantly going to be working. We created an entire productivity tools team dedicated to solving these problems for you to make you more productive. So Jason, with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Wow, totally awesome. Very cool. Thank you, Brian. So let me get back. I'll show my screen. One thing I wanted to bring up here, if you are a Xamarin developer, email Brian. We want to hear from you. We know that there's people out there building Xamarin apps. It's not a ton of pickup, but there is pickup in Xamarin. Mobility in the enterprise is moving a little bit slower than we had expected, but we have so many cool things with Xamarin. We've done a bunch of new features for this release, the grid, some of the grid features being one of them, of course, continuing on to add more data visualization features, but our Xamarin Toolkit now has, you know, a dozen or two widgets, and it's pretty powerful on top of all the productivity stuff. Now, one of the things that Brian did show you was that grid configurator, and I just want to give you a sneak peek here of what we're doing on the WPF side. This will release in the next few weeks, but on WPF for 17.2, we released all the chart configurators. The grid configurator for Xam Data Grid, which you just saw, was specifically for Xamarin. The one that we're building now is for WPF, and it's super, super robust. As you know, if you are a WPF developer using our product, we have an intensely, insanely rich API and object model that really lets the grid render anything in any way that you can possibly imagine, totally taking advantage of WPF and what it offers. So you'll see here that, again, this is just showing some data that was bound. On the left-hand side, I've got my field layout settings, field settings, view settings, and of course, it's bound to data, so I have different layouts based on the hierarchical view of my data. And then we start getting into what you can do with those individual fields and the property editors for those fields. And what we're actually building here is sort of a designer which allows you to, through just, you know, using your mouse, laying out multi-column headers, column spans, row spans, and moving data around. So this is coming soon. Keep an eye out for it. When we do ship it, you'll get an email around this, but this is pretty exciting as well as far as productivity on the WPF data grid side. Now, continuing on, developer productivity, what I want to talk about is the Ignite UI CLI, which I mentioned earlier. Now, to get the Ignite UI CLI, let me go to up here. Just go to npmjs.com and search for the Ignite UI CLI package. I added this to some bigger letters here, so you might be able to see it. So in your terminal, type in npm install, do it globally, Ignite UI CLI, and once you do that, you'll have the CLI across the board. Now, in npmjs.com, in this homepage, you have some of the available commands and some of the things that we're trying to do here. So, for example, Ignite UI, new project name, what framework, what theme, and then it starts, you know, generating the files for this application, etc. What I'm going to do is walk you through a couple examples of what we're doing here. So this is, and this will give you a very clear idea of how this thing works. So I'm here in my shell. I'm in my C:\webinar. So essentially, I just type in Ignite-UI, and I hit enter. Now what happens is if you don't pass it the full string of what you actually want to build, you start going through this sort of wizardy thing here. So enter the project name, and I'll say webinar 1, and I'll hit enter, and then it'll say, okay, what framework do you want to use? Now today, this CLI works for Ignite UI for JavaScript, which supports Angular, jQuery, and React. Over the next few weeks, you know, it's just being continuously delivered, we are adding capabilities and templates specifically for Ignite UI for Angular. So it'll just continue to get updated. You'll have more capabilities, more features in the CLI. So let's say that I just want to do an Angular app, and I can choose a theme for the project, and I can choose to create a complete application or just add a component. At this point, I want to add a component. I'll add a data grid. I'm going to add the grid. I'll name the name of my grid will be named grid 1. And what grid features do I want? I'll say filtering, paging, and sorting, and hit enter. Choose an action, either complete this wizard, add another component. I'll go ahead and I'll add a chart. You can see I'm just using the up and down arrow, and I can flip through here, see all the chart features that are available to me, etc. I'll do a line chart. Call this guy chart 1. I'll hit enter, and I'll be done with that. So now it's actually going off and using the CLI. It's creating the entire project for this. You notice that this was in the webinar folder here. So let's go to C:\webinar. Here's webinar 1, and it's going off and it's created all of the files for me. Here's my source folder. Here's my actual app. And you can see that it's just generating all this as the package is getting built. And this will build eventually. It's going off and doing stuff on the internet. But it's going to create an Angular app. In that Angular app, it's going to have 2 pages. One of those pages is going to have a grid. Another page is going to have a chart. And then I can just run that, and I sort of have a starting point for what I want to do next. You can see it's installing my NPM packages. And at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a new window. And in my new window, I'm going to do another cd backslash. Oh, my computer's kind of dying a little bit here. A lot going on with GoToMeeting. Oops. CD webinar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another more complete one. And this one will be called Webinar 2. I'll hit enter. And we'll do a jQuery app. It'll be Infragistics. And I'll add a template. And I'll do a dashboard. And I'll call it DB1. And it'll just be complete. And that'll keep going. So looks like, oh, interesting. There was an NPM error here. But it's my project starting. Yep, it went ahead. Oh, actually, my other project started first. So it looks like there was an issue getting that guy. But this is an example of some of the things that you can actually do. So this is a pre-built template that we actually are providing as part of an example in the CLI. But what you can do is create your own templates with your own widgets. So I was talking to a customer a couple of weeks ago, and they said, hey, it would be nice if we had some options for dashboard templates that we could give to our users that had a bunch of different grids and different charts and different interactions. And of course, so we built one and we just added it as part of the CLI. And what this ends up giving you is the ability to give your developers sort of pre-built stuff that they don't have to think about. So if there's a common pattern or common theme that you would use across the board for generating screens, you could literally automate a majority of the screen generation using the CLI because it's 100% template driven. Like I said, please take a look at this. This is just the beginning of what we're going to achieve with the CLI, but it continues to talk about that developer productivity story that we are really pushing across the board with the products. The configurators that Brian said, like I mentioned, we'll continue to move those over to JavaScript. So you have a bunch of different options here, doing something from the command line, doing something visually. But at the end of the day, the idea is that I want to be able to generate all this code instead of having to write it myself. So if you think about what it takes to build an Angular app and then you start adding things like components to that app, it gets really dicey. There's a lot of stuff that you end up having to build. And so we don't want you to have to do that. We want to do that for you. So in this case, we went ahead. We know our grid better than anyone. So if we give you the grid template option within a CLI, you can just start generating these things yourselves, importing your own data yourselves, and then incrementally building out apps with less and less code. And that's the whole idea with the CLI. So next up, I want to demonstrate Ignite UI for Angular. So if I go to infragistics.com and you look at the pull-down menu here for developers, the drop-down, you've got Ignite UI for Angular and Ignite UI for JavaScript. So if I go ahead and I select Ignite UI for Angular, you'll see that here we have our 30+ material-based Angular components to code speedy web apps faster. One of the nice things is one of the new sort of directions that we're doing with this product is ensuring that it is built for lightweight application download, like small file size. So that means we are focused on JavaScript file size because every byte counts when you're building applications for the public web. So historically, line of business apps that are behind the firewall, no one really cares. They can be as big as you want. But when it comes to something like Angular, it might run in the behind the firewall or publicly for customers. So we want to make sure that the application does that. So you'll see running samples like this across, basically everything that we're doing. So here I'm sorting by rank, sorting by athlete number, sorting by beats per minute. I can do a filter here. So I'll just start typing in my filter. The nice thing is this is an integrated filter on the column. I can also do an external filter. So here I can filter by country, and I'm typing in United States, and I'm ultimately just going to get those guys, whatever has United in there, and then there's state. So super optimized, super fast, etc. Another nice thing, since this is all available on GitHub, you can go ahead and grab any of this stuff and clone not only our own repo, you can do pull requests, you can grab the UI kits that I mentioned earlier. So if I select the Ignite UI kit, this is all up on GitHub as well. So beautifully styled sketch-based widgets that map to our UI widgets. If you want to look at our extensions for React, if you want to get the CLI, we have a little more robust sample, a warehouse app using Ignite UI for Angular. And then if you just want to go and clone the repo yourself and start working with it, if I jump into source, you can see everything's available here. We're not really hiding anything. If I go to the grid, this is all of the components that are available for the grid. And here's the TypeScript for the grid common TS file, and it's all there. So everything's available on GitHub, so you can go check it out, as well as all of the samples. So the sample that I was just showing, I actually grabbed off of GitHub as well. So that's in one of our samples here. So you can see Ignite UI samples. And if I go into the source, drill into here, I've got all of the entire sample browser application. So where is the sample browser application? So back to our website on the marketing side, you can see here I was just on this page, and I can go ahead and get started for free. So we want you to fill out your trial information there, so you'll get the email with all the support stuff. But getting started is simply just doing an npm install Ignite UI.js blocks, and you can add a little bit of code, and then you can get a sample up and running real quickly. Now, what we're doing with all of the samples is we are not only having running samples right within just a regular sample browser like you'd expect, but we are showing you how to build those samples, and we're integrating in code as well as the API in the sample itself. So you don't have to click all over the website to try to find how to actually use the product, learn the product, etc. So super developer friendly on how we're approaching this product. And then of course the grid right now has a handful of features. As we add another handful, we might add a secondary page. But the idea is, if you want to go look and see how do you do the linear progress demo, you can go right here. And here I'll press the play button. And how does all that work? Well, all of the code is right here, and it's all available in the sample on GitHub itself. Some of the other richer controls that we added, so we have a scheduling widget, we've got dialog widgets, we've got input and output editors, we've got cards just like you'd expect from a material-based UI, and of course, following material, you get all of the nice animations and hover effects. We have a date picker, and then of course we have a style guide which talks about all of the colors, the default themes, and the typography that you should use for this. So sort of turning this into not only material based, but pushing a design language that we are using as well. So now if I go back to this data grid sample, I just want to show you what this looks like in Angular real quick. So here I've got, let's see, grid, got a few things running here. Here we are. So here's my grid component, and you can see that this is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. We actually have local data that we're using for this particular grid, but there's the actual grid widget, and then here what we're doing is we're defining the columns. So similar to what you had before in Ignite UI for JavaScript, but this is basically built directly on top of Angular, so there's no relationship between those two code bases. But you can see that here we are using a standard Angular template to render the avatar for the person. We're defining some columns here like name, athlete number, beats per minute, etc. You'll notice we're setting filtering to true on this column. We're not doing that on the other columns. Here's another template. So this is, again, just simply adding your templates on each column individually, and then you could run this, and then you would see that that previous sample. And I think this guy here, we're running it on localhost. It was 4,200. Let me see. But all of these guys end up running locally on localhost. So I think it's this one here. Oh, let me do /grid. So there you go. So there's the sample. So just like it was running in the page, now it's running here. And what's really nice about this is it's not taking up hardly any of the processor. It's a couple percent. It's not taking up really any memory, and it's a fully functional, really beautifully styled grid. So if you want to check out what we're doing on the Angular side, just go to igniteui.com, and then you'll figure out which way do you go. Do you go to Ignite UI for Angular or Ignite UI for JavaScript based on what you're building? Now, one of the nice features that I did mention earlier was the time series data. So I actually have a sample running already. This is actually the code for it. We're going to put this on a blog. I believe it's already up on a blog at infragistics.com. You click blogs and you'll see all this stuff. But this is the time series. And what I want to show you here, this is actually linked into live data, a Bitcoin exchange. We've done a couple things here where you can swap out the different column types, etc. But as I drill in and drill out, you can see that on the bottom, the time axis is behaving as if it understands time. So as I zoom in and I zoom out, I'm going from the full date all the way down to the date and the hour, and then all the way down to just the hour on that particular date. So there's no code here for you to do that, and it gives you a lot of nice capability by just saying, hey, I've got data, it's a date time field, and I want to plot this, and I want to be able to zoom in, zoom out, and then do really nice things like filter that data very quickly. Now this is going off to the Bitcoin exchange. I did the year-to-date view. So let's see, this might take a second or two to come up. Oh, there we go. And it did, so I'll zoom all the way out. And of course, in this sample particularly, you can take a look and see how we did all of the swapping between the chart types, but it's pretty straightforward, not very complex. Now, when I mentioned that we are actually building out a financial chart, which has all that UI around it, when you look at this sample here for the GDAX, all of this is app code across the top, like the filtering and the different column swapping, etc. Everything else is just part of the chart. So we're going to put some ornaments around the actual time series and throw it out as a stock chart. So it just saves you a lot of code. Less and less code for you to write, the better. And then finally, let me fire up our WPF samples because I want to show a couple things before I hand it off to George for his demo on Indigo. And I mentioned earlier that there were the break-even chart type here. So this is one of those samples that I mentioned, really good for cost accounting. But what I wanted to really highlight is that the code to actually get this chart to render, and I'll put this here and make it a little bit bigger for you, is super simple. So in order to render that entire chart, the only thing I'm doing is I'm giving it fixed cost, variable cost, revenue, and the number of units. And then we take over, we do the rest. So this is the only code that you actually need to render this chart. And it gives a whole ton of information. So if you're doing any accounting, any cost accounting, this is something that you could really benefit from. And then previously I mentioned some of the richer capabilities of the chart. As you start getting into different types of shapes, different types of polylines, here is a blueprint of a floor plan, and basically it's 10 meter by 10 meter area, and you're just plotting out the intersecting axes, and you'll get a floor plan. Then of course things like binding geographic data, we're really good at that, and so this is binding a shape similar to this airplane shape, which is a shape file. It's an Esri shape file which again comes with the .dbf extension as well. So you're not really doing anything. We will read it natively and we will plot it. And in this example, we're showing the length and the width of this airplane in feet and inches, as well as all of the seats. And you can see that each seat has a tooltip, but you don't have to have that chart background. It's up to you on what you're really doing. So a lot of new capabilities here across the board in the data visualization components. You benefit from these both in Windows Forms and in JavaScript. So with that, I am out of time for that demo. I'm going to pass it over to George, who is going to talk about some of the new things, specifically around Sketch exporting to Indigo Studio. So George, let me share the screen or give you the ability to be the organizer. Now you are the presenter, George, so you can take it away. And it looks like, George, we've probably got about maybe 5 to 10 minutes left, and then so if you could maybe give a good 5-minute demo, we'll finish up the webinar for everyone to go have lunch.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jason. So let me know, Jason, you can hear me fine, right?
Yep, I can hear you and I can see your screen.
Oh, wonderful. So let me just minimize this panel here. So just like Jason was mentioning, we've been working hard to basically bring the Sketch users into the fold and getting them introduced to what prototyping is all about. And it's not just about making pretty pictures, it's also about being able to use these prototypes on devices and being able to conduct usability testing with real people, right, to get usability videos in return. So in order to enable that, we have built a Sketch plugin, which you can get hold of from the website, from my Infragistics product website, and you can go in and look at wherever we mention import designs from Sketch. You can click on it, and what it basically gives you is a Sketch plugin. To install and use the Sketch plugin, all you need to do is open it up from where you have downloaded it. So in this case, I'm just going to look here, click on the plugin, and that's it. That's as simple to install it in Sketch. Now, in order to move things which you have designed in Sketch, so you may have a design language already set up, or you might be using some kind of a process within your organization to create designs in Sketch. But once you have all the screens laid out in Sketch, to get it to Indigo Studio is as simple as going into your plugins area, look for the Indigo Studio plugin, and just say export the current page. What it does is that we automatically detect what kind of device you were designing for. But if for some reason that doesn't work, you can always change it and tell us what kind of device it is. And this will allow you to pick the viewport in terms of what kind of device you're designing for. The moment you hit export project, we take care of creating this project for you. We take all the screens you have all the artboards you've created in Sketch, and we create a screen for you automatically. And the moment the project is completed, this is the project exported. I'm going to just fire up Indigo Studio here, drag and drop the project into Indigo Studio, and there you have it. These are all the screens which were created as part using the plugin. Now to get prototyping, I can just come in here, open up the screen. And since we have used the plugin, we have also allowed the outline of the documents to stay intact. What that means is that you can actually add interactions directly to a UI element on screen. So in this case, I want to kind of add an interaction to the sign in button. I can just double click to access the nested elements. I can say add an interaction, navigate to screen and project. And in this case, I just want to go to this food menu. I can just select that. And in addition to just adding interactions, and we have these available interactions for mobile, which is taps, double taps, or gesture-based interactions. But in addition to regular interactions, we also have the built-in screen transitions. So in this case, we have defaulted to showing a slide transition, just making your job easier. And now you can just proceed with your user story. In this case, I want to go to this next screen here and say that I want to animate in a menu. So in this case, I would say, anytime I want to add interaction to this nav area here, I'll say anytime the user taps the nav bar, I would say navigate to a screen and project. And I'm going to look for a project in which the menu is exposed. I can open up that menu here. But here I'm going to do something different. Instead of doing it as a screen-to-screen transition, I'm going to use a custom transition. So in this case, I'm going to say no transition here, go into that screen, and then I can attach a transition directly to a UI element. So in this case, I can just select this menu here and go into the properties panel and animation effects. I would say this one needs to slide right, and this overlay in the background needs to fade in. And that's about it. This is how you create a custom transitions. Let's just run this prototype as we have designed it. Hit run screen, hit sign in, hit the menu, and that's it. Now, this is how you've been adding interactivity by creating a prototype out of your Sketch artboards. But in order to actually send it to someone, it's as simple as just hitting share screen. And this will allow you to publish it to your workspace. And then in return, we're having some difficulties because I'm remote. You can actually generate a link to this prototype and send this link to anyone, and they'll be able to access this prototype on their devices. And this, instead of sending it as a prototype, you also have the option of just sending it as a usability study. For that, you just hit create usability study. It'll take care of the screens which are connected in here. And then you can just create a study on indigodesign.com. And then you can finish up the study by adding tasks and then inviting people to take part in the study. So that's a very quick demo of how simple it is to get designs out of Sketch, which are purely static, move them into Indigo Studio to make it more interactive and dynamic, and then be able to share it with anyone, whether it's end users or business stakeholders, in order to get feedback on the designs you've been working on. With that, I'll just hand it back to Jason to wrap this up. Jason, all you.
That's awesome, George. Thank you. So let me get this straight. So if I create something in Sketch, my designer does that. They can export it and send me a file or whatever. I open it up, but all of the widgets basically come through. It's not like just an image coming over from Sketch.
No, that's right. You can just select whatever you have in Sketch, and it's always in sync. So that's what this plugin helps us do. So I can just select a plugin here, and I can just give it a different color and be able to sync this change into my project and always have my interactivity intact without having to redo the prototype.
So cool. That's pretty incredible. And keep in mind, what I mentioned earlier is that we have the Sketch UI kits for JS blocks or for Ignite UI for Angular. So if I create a design using these UI widgets and they go into Indigo, there's a mapping there as well. So the story just continues to get better around the productivity side. So thank you very much, George. That's awesome. One last thing I want to mention on Indigo. I did mention Indigo on-prem earlier. Indigo on-prem is definitely something you want to check out if you are not allowed to have to share designs in the cloud. So George was saying create usability study, share prototype. We're actually connecting to indigodesign.com. If you want that locally in your enterprise, we have an offer right now for that, and it does all these things. It allows you to have, you know, your project workflow and requirements definition, all of your prototyping, testing, etc., all available to you on-prem. So we have two deals going. One is a $10,000 a year, another one's $25K a year, and that includes training. So if you're that type of company, please contact us, sales@infragistics.com, to start a discussion around what we're doing there. So to wrap this up, let me go really quick here because we're just about over time. We'll stay on for another 15 minutes or so and answer questions through the chat. So if you guys have questions, just keep typing them in. Download 17.2 today. This is a huge release. There's tons of stuff. I didn't even get to show everything just because we didn't have time. But definitely check out in Ignite UI for JavaScript. Check out all of the new stuff that we've added to the spreadsheet, some of the new grid features. Play around with the Ignite UI CLI. I want to get your feedback on Ignite UI for Angular. Angular is hugely popular now. This product's getting a lot of big investment from us. So continue to expect more productivity features, more grid features, and like I said, the charts are imminent. On the visual configurators for Xamarin and WPF, we're continuing to invest there. Look forward to the XAM data grid configurator for WPF coming within the next week or two. We're real close on that. And then, of course, Indigo Studio. When we think about visual designer to UX designer, UX architect to developer, that's the productivity chain that drives software development today in the enterprise. That's where we're really focused here in shipping Infragistics Ultimate. So please go to infragistics.com, download Ultimate. If you're a licensed customer, grab your product key, get the updates. If you're new to Infragistics, please download a trial and then contact sales. And just to recap, modern web, desktop productivity, and designer developer productivity are what this release is all about, and it's what you'll continue to see from Infragistics. Hopefully you got a flavor of that in some of the demos today. We're really excited. But please contact us if you have any more questions. I'm Jason B. We have B. Lagunas, Brian, and then George is George Abraham. So gabraham@infragistics.com if you have any questions about any of those features. But with that, we're going to sign off now. We'll stay on to answer questions in the chat window. I want to thank everyone again for joining us today, and have a nice rest of the week. Thank you. Bye-bye.